No, it's 5:04. We were going to give you one more minute.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Kathleen, where are you? Commissioner Sullivan? Is she in the restroom or right outside? Oh, she is? Okay, we'll just wait a minute longer here. Oh, here we go. Good evening. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but there will be no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board are welcome to do so during the board's regularly scheduled meetings. Tonight we're going to discuss the Clatsop County Jail. We have a presentation from the DLR group, and I'd like to introduce Justin. I already forgot your last name. So
Strenzel.
there we go. And so welcome, Justin, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Yes, I am Justin Stronzel. I am with DLR Group. DLR Group is, of course, the architecture firm that worked on the plan for the jail for which the bond measure was referred to the ballot. I did not have a hand in the crafting of that plan. My role at DLR Group is business development, and we're working with clients to pass bond measures. So I've worked on bond measures for a variety of jurisdictions around the state. I guess most recently would have been the Crook County jail bond measure in November of 2016. That passed by about 69% yes. I've worked on a bunch of school district bonds. My team and I, the Nestucca Valley School District bond measure that's on the ballot coming up for a little farther down the coast is one of ours. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is just what does this mean? Generally, communities haven't gone through this before. County commissions haven't been through it. A lot of county staff haven't been through it. So what does it take to educate your electorate about what is on the ballot? Feel free to jump in and interrupt at any point.
I want to bring your microphone just a little closer.
Closer?
So we can
Sure, I
get
can sit closer too. Sorry about that.
Get you on the video and everything.
Is this better?
That's perfect.
Okay. So your role on this is to educate your community on exactly why this bond measure has been referred. You've already held a vote in March to send this measure to the November ballot. So that's that's decided. And so you really do have a responsibility, regardless of your personal beliefs on whether this should pass or fail, to let your community know why that decision was made. And what this bond measure entails. From a facility standpoint, from an operational standpoint, you want to let your voters know, how did we get here? Because ultimately, your voters are smart people. They have to be. They voted for all 5 of you, and if you give them the right if you give them all of the information, they're going to make the right decision. That might be yes, that might be no. I am a resident of Portland, Oregon, and just recently finished paying off a bond measure for a jail where voters didn't have all the information. Operational costs weren't covered, and voters maybe wouldn't have voted yes if everything would have been covered there. In Crook County, we made an honest effort to give voters all the information, and the right decision in Crook County was yes to build a jail there. So, ultimately, if the plan is the correct one, your voters will vote, and you give them all the information, your voters will vote yes. And if the plan is wrong or it's not the right time, then your voters can make a different decision. But you want to let them make a decision based on all of the facts and not hearsay and not a lack of information. So, this happens through a consensus building process, and there are 2 ways that a bond measure can go. There's county leaders kind of get together, sit in a conference room, decide this is the project that we need to have. They put it on the ballot, and it fails. The better effort, the more successful effort, is a consistent community conversation, and I believe that that's what's been happening here in Clatsop County. It's a long effort. Your voters are in the know, in the loop along the way. The media has been covering it. You've invited people into the room. people feel like they've been heard. That doesn't mean that everyone's voice has been incorporated into the plan, but they've had an opportunity to address it. And by the time the bond measure hits the ballot, there's no surprises. People know what this is, and they're prepared to vote yes or no. It's not a temporary committee. This is something that begins prior to election day and goes all the way through and then beyond that. So it's yourselves, it's your county government, it's anybody in the community who's invested in a project like this. Coming together, that can be at county commission meetings, it can be, elsewhere in planning efforts, but, voices have been heard. You've been, you solicit honest feedback. When you go and talk to your community about what this measure is, you give them the truth and you ask them, you want them to hit you with the hard questions. You go and speak to a broad audience. You can't just stay here in Astoria and expect a bond measure to pass. If you've got to get out to your entire county. That requires a lot of work, but you've got a responsibility to do it. You have taxpayers, in some pretty far-flung places, and they have a right to know what they're voting on. And this is ongoing and year-round. This shouldn't just be, a couple of workshops, here before summer hits. You should be giving your voters plenty of opportunities between now and November to know why this measure has been placed on the ballot, and what it entails. You want the media in the room, and certainly they have been. There's been plenty of coverage in the Daily Historian of how this bond measure came about. That's a good thing. They may not, whether it's not about them being your friends. I mean, you need the media to tell your voters what's going on. And if they're not showing up, make sure that you're getting them in the loop. And that's not just the newspaper, but your radio stations, blogs that have any particular influence. You want to make sure they have the right information, and sometimes that can be hard. You want easy to read graphics and materials. So, ideally now, once this measure, now that this measure is on the ballot, kiosk boards in each of your county government buildings that just explain what this project is. Really simple info. It can go out in the water bill to your voters, explaining what this is. This is, the county government cannot engage in telling voters to vote yes or no. All of you can as elected officials, but your county government can't. But your county government can educate the voters in, every means possible that they traditionally use. And they have a duty to do that. So, think about all the ways you share information with your voters about other topics, and make sure that they're hearing about this jail bond in that regard. Consensus building does not mean that everyone is in unanimous agreement, but it means that you've got a decision that everybody can support. And on this jail bond measure, I don't know personally how each of you feel about this measure. I know that, there was a vote to send the measure to the ballot. At this point, that's done. It's out there. You've made a decision that all of you can support, and now, no matter how you feel about it in your heart, go out to your community and give them all the information and let them make the decision that makes sense for them. So the things that tend to matter to voters on a jail bond measure, you want to prioritize detention correctional goals. So that's not just keeping people, keeping your community safe, but it's about, treatment plans. What's going to be done in this facility? You're thinking about parity and equity across your community and inside that facility. You're incorporating your community expectations and culture. So, a jail plan here, is not necessarily going to be the same as a jail plan somewhere else in Oregon. And you should be able to talk to your voters about that. It should look at the demographics of your community and the people, who traditionally have been in your jail. It should be designed for flexibility. If you pass a bond measure and this jail is obsolete the day it opens and you can't do anything to correct that, we've all made a bad decision. It integrates technology. It's focused on safety and security. It's thinking about future trends in corrections and facilities. It optimizes existing sites and facilities, so it doesn't always mean just building everything new, but taking advantage of what you have. anticipates future needs in terms of that area of the county and the facility, and the schedules and the budgets are real. So why do bond measures fail? Number one, and this is whether it's a county bond, whether it's a school bond, the biggest reason bonds fail is a split council vote. Now, you've already had your vote, and we didn't have a split council vote here, but if, when your council comes out and votes 3-2 or 4-1, that gives your voters a much easier opportunity to say, I'm just going to agree with Commissioner X. I don't need to think about this anymore, and I'm going to vote no. The consensus solution wasn't adopted by commissioners, so, a plan that the people who have been in the room as decisions were made, in terms of planning this, if they came up with the plan that they thought was right, and then the 5 of you made a totally separate decision, that's a cause for failure. Apathy, if your voters just don't care about this issue, your measure's not going to pass no matter, how important it is. I don't believe that's the case here. There's certainly plenty of attention paid to, the need for a new jail in Clatsop County. I wouldn't expect apathy among your voters on this topic. The consequence of failure was not fully conveyed. This is a really hard one for governments to kind of wrap their head around. It's not about going out and telling your voters, here's all the stuff that's going to happen if you pass this bond. You also have to tell your voters, this is what's going to happen if we don't pass the bond. What's going to happen with the Clatsop County Jail now and 10 years from now if we don't replace the existing facility? The facility design, the size, the features, the location weren't decided. You have an actual jail plan in place. That's not going to be an issue for you. But it's not uncommon for communities to pass bond measures and not really have an idea of exactly how that money is going to be spent. That shouldn't be an issue here. The tax increase was unreasonable. That is, can absolutely sink a bond measure. Weak county leaders or a lack of credibility.
Can I just hold you up for a
Please.
minute? So tax increase was unreasonable. What I've been hearing a lot of is that there are a lot of school bond measures at the same, so there's a cumulative tax increase that I think is problematic for a lot of voters, and I'm not sure how to address that. I wonder if you can help me with that.
I think that's going to be a real issue for you. You've got, if I'm not mistaken, there are at least 2 school bond measures in parts of the county that are on the ballot this November. And it's, if voters are just deciding based on the pocketbook, it's generally easier to say I'm going to vote for schools and I'm going to vote for something else. So it just makes it even more paramount that you get out to all of your voters, especially in those jurisdictions where voters are voting on those school bonds, and make sure they understand why this measure is on the ballot and what it's about. Don't just let them know that there's a new jail bond measure on the ballot. That's, again, why it's so essential to tell them why. Let them understand why you believe this measure is important, why you felt that right now in November 2018, even with those school bond measures on the ballot, you made a decision to refer this to them. It's certainly not going to be easy. And it doesn't always, it's not just about how much money your voters have in your pocketbook. It's about having the right plan. I don't know the specifics of either of the school bonds that are on the ballot across the county. I don't know if those are good plans or not. But I know that you have a plan, and so ideally your voters can look at it and make a decision and compartmentalize those 2 school bond measures. We've worked on school bond measures in the past where we went out and ran a bond measure in a community where the economy was tough and the bond sank. And then we came back and retooled it and brought the community in, and actually the bond got more expensive even than the recession, and the bond went and passed the next time around because it was the plan was the right one. You've just got to trust, you've put a lot of work in at this point. You've got to trust that you've made the best decision possible that the 5 of you can agree on, and trust that your voters are going to agree with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. weak county leaders or a lack of credibility can really hurt you. If your community doesn't trust the 5 of you, they don't have to agree with you, they don't have to like you, but if they don't believe you, they're not going to pass this bond measure. The education effort was poorly organized. So if if you just don't take the time as not you, but your county government, if they don't take the time to prepare all of the materials that need to happen, and I'm going to talk about this a little later in the presentation, you're not going to pass. You can't let special interest groups or particular demographics drive this measure. It has to be something that can matter to people across the county. And you cannot let your PAC drive the education effort. The message has to come from you. This is your bond measure. It's not the PAC's, and ultimately the story has to be yours. There should be a PAC, and they're going to have a story to tell, but the story that ultimately should be heard by voters the most is the story that the 5 of you have in terms of why you decided to put this measure on the ballot. So the way this works, there are kind of two efforts happening simultaneously. There's the fact-based effort, the county informational campaign, which is not telling people to vote yes or no, but putting all of the information on the table. So it's your paid staffers in county government just getting the information out, and then at the same time, there's that promotional effort happening by the PAC. The PAC is going to be out sharing information. Ideally, they're sharing the same information as the county. Your county government can't coordinate with the PAC in terms of the messaging, but you can, if they have their facts wrong, you can tell them that. If the PAC is going out and saying the bond costs this, and you can factually demonstrate that no, the bond costs this, go show them that. That's what I mean when I say it's important that you're leading the messaging, not the PAC. It's really easy for your PAC. You can't trust that your PAC is going to get things right. You've got to keep an eye on it and make sure that they're sharing the right information. So some do's and don'ts. Successful bonds, which recruit strategically. What that means is, as a PAC is coming together, it's not just, well, that person's shown the most interest, they should be leading the PAC. It should be somebody your community trusts and supports. The person who is most excited about this doesn't necessarily going to be somebody your community believes. I don't know the specifics here, but that's something that you'll know. So that's what I mean by recruit strategically. It's you're organized and focused and proactive. So ideally, your PAC is already there are people who are clamoring for an opportunity to be part of that right now. And unsuccessful bonds campaigns are unorganized and reactionary. You don't have any kind of internal calendar of how you're going to get this information out. You don't do much more than have a couple commission here meetings where it's talked about. You really do have to have an informational campaign. It avoids a summer campaign, and that's going to be hard. Your measures on the ballot in November, but in the summer your voters check out. They're not reading the newspaper. They're just not invested in information, in all that much compared to what they're going to become, the fall. So you really want to start telling your story, within the next, you've got another month or so before school classes end. Start getting the message out now, and then, as it's time for people to come back to school, September, October, that's when you really want to hit people hard. And that's enough time. A really successful bond campaign is generally about 10 weeks long. Now I know that's different from what I said earlier. I said this is a year-long process, but in terms of the serious information effort, when you're really making sure that this is everywhere in front of your voters, it's you don't want to exhaust them. You don't want people to think that they've been trying to figure this out for 4 years. Give them about 10 weeks from backed up from election day to get all the info. A successful bond lives by the 20-60-20 rule, and what that is 20% of your electorate is going to believe that what you're doing is right no matter what. 20% of the electorate is going to think that you're way off no matter what, and they're never going to support you no matter how good the idea is. And then there's that 60% squishy group in the middle. You know, some of them are pretty likely to support you, some are pretty likely to hate you, but they're not sure. They're willing to take all the information that you put in front of them. And those are the people you need to speak to. If you want to pass a bond measure, you don't spend your time educating the 20% who already get it. I mean, you want to get them on your pack, but you don't need to be bombarding them with info. You need to get the info out to the people who haven't made their minds up and who are willing to listen to you. And a successful committee, educates, this goes back to what I said before, the benefits of voting yes and the consequences of voting no. You cannot just tell your people what happens with a yes vote. You've got to tell the other side of the story. It's a successful bond measure is a dual path campaign. There's the informational campaign that your county government is presenting, and then there's a PAC that is sharing information. The tax paying threshold is factored into the solution of the master plan. You've thought about how much your community can afford, and that doesn't mean maybe we haven't made the right decision, but certainly you've been thinking about it. You've scientifically tried to determine what your community wants and expects. So you've got data that went into this plan in terms of incarceration rates, in terms of what you think is what is going to happen, not what you think is going to happen in this community. If data is what's developed your plan, you've got a much better chance of passing something. Really important, this ballot measure should be about the jail. It should not be about any of the 5 of you. I believe there's individual commissioner elections that are coming up. It shouldn't be about them. It shouldn't be about any other issues. It shouldn't be about anything else in your county. It should be about the jail. And if it's not, you're not going to pass. And it builds consensus. Ideally your public come election day just thinks this is a no-brainer. And you should feel good on election day that it's going to pass. If November rolls around and you don't think your bond's going to pass, your bond's not going to pass. If you've put all the work into it and you still don't think it's going to pass, it's probably not going to pass. So some of the things I talked about, stuff that you need to prepare for your voters. You want a concise history of this study process, and what that means is, not just the stuff that DLR Group has prepared for you, but any study that's ever happened in regard to your existing jail. Dig all of that up. It exists on a file, a folder somewhere on shelves in your county government offices. Get them, digitize them, and put them on your website. Let voters see everything that's ever been looked at about that building. And every planning session along the way, every meeting that DLR Group has had with the county, anything that we've produced for you, get that onto your website. Put all of it in front of your voters. Ultimately, what you want is when somebody comes and says to you, you didn't tell us that, you should be able to say, go to the website, it's there. You want an FAQ, a FAQ, frequently asked questions. You should really get into work on one right now that's about 40 questions of just, sit down and think about what are the hardest questions for this community, and, or what are the most likely questions that this community is going to have, and have answers for them. And as you're out listening to your voters and they have questions for you, no matter how ridiculous that question you might think is, put it on your FAQ and have an answer for it. You want a financial impact statement, and you want that available to voters. You want to tell people what this thing costs, not just how many millions it is, what it means in terms of, your individual household. What does this mean for the voter, on an every month basis, on an everyday basis? How much are they paying per year? How long are they going to pay for this bond? They need to know all of that. The specific financial terms of the bond issue should be in bulleted form. So again, be concise. I mean, you've got a lot of information to get out there, but you should have lots and lots and lots of records on the website, but you should also have something concise for the people who just want to get, the elevator speech on the bond and understand it. You want that consequences of failure statement from your county leadership. Again, that tell your voters what no means and get it on your website. You want the benefits of the project in bulleted form. You want all the final drawings of plans that have been produced. Get them out there. Let people see them. Just make everything available. more things you need to document prior to this happening. You want the contact information, in your county, who is going to be your media liaison, and you want somebody who is going to answer questions that come from the general public. Those might be two different people, or they might be the same one, but you need to know who it is. Ultimately, there should be somebody here who can answer a phone call when somebody calls and says, how much does this cost, or, why are we doing this? There's got to be somebody who has the answers and who has, has been told it's their responsibility to return those phone calls and emails. You should have contact information for all the consultants that worked on this. So, put them in, steer them toward DLR Group if it's something that DLR Group should be talking about. And anybody else who's been involved, whether it's a geotechnical survey or what have you, share those consultants' contact info. Let your voters talk to them. It's every bond measure that we've worked on, we hear from community members. When I mean DLR Group. Asking, all right, you're the architects, why did you do this? Make it easy on them. Give them that contact info. Let them call us. You want a fact sheet that, covers the entire bond scope. So simple one page that you can put in front of people at, anywhere in the community. It can be at a coffee shop. It can be, when they walk into, your county courthouse for filing something. They can pick it up and leave with it and read it on their way back to the car. You need to have a likely and frequent voter list from your elections office. You want to have all of those key dates for, voter registration, for absentee balloting. You need to be thinking about that in terms of your campaign, because you're not doing yourself any good if all of your information comes out after the ballots have been sent. You need that specific web address where people are going to get the info. I mean, ideally, it's just clatsop.co.or.us/bond. It's not a zillion, subfolders down from the main site. And you want ground rules for bond issue participation for your staff, for your commissioners, and for your administration. It's really important that you sit down with the people who work in county government right away and tell them, here is what you can and can't say. The state of Oregon has manuals that explain what county government can and can't do. Get that into their hands and talk to them about it. Tell them who they should who they should go to when they hear a question from somebody in the community. That all needs to be decided now. Yes?
Justin, you might get into this a little more, but, item 15 we're talking about right now is really important. And so is that on the Secretary of State's website?
It is.
Elections?
It is, yes. If you go to the Secretary of State's site for elections, they've got all of that there. The Oregon Elections Office, and I've worked on bond campaigns in Oregon and Idaho and Washington, and there is no Secretary of State's office that is better about providing information than the state of Oregon. There is so much there. It goes beyond that. One of the things I love about bond measures in Oregon, if county government prepares material, or you have somebody prepare that material, whether it's DLR Group or somebody else, you can take that to the Secretary of State's office, to the elections office, and ask them to review it. And within 3 to 5 business days, they will take a look at it, and they will grant it safe harbor, which means this has been cleared by the elections office. If somebody comes and complains, their complaints aren't going to go anywhere. You're not going to get in trouble for it. You're not going to get fined for engaging in campaign efforts. Or what they also will do is they'll give you feedback on this part and this part and this part and this part are toe the line of telling your voters to vote yes or no, and will tell you how to change your language. They're awesome about making sure that you are presenting, that county government is giving truly an informational campaign as opposed to a vote yes campaign. So take advantage of that. So advice from those who have done it. This is your peers on county governments around Oregon. Every time a bond or levy passes in Oregon or fails, I reach out to the county commissioners who I know, and I've gotten to know a bunch of them through Association of Oregon Counties and what have you, and ask them what their thoughts were. Why did this go right? Why did this go wrong? And their list, the things that they tend to say is, have a list of must-haves, not a list of wants. It's really easy to come up with a plan that costs $400 million and has every single component that everybody on the commission thinks needs to be in there, but that's never going to be realistic in terms of satisfying your electorate and fitting into their wallets. It's got to be, you've got to have a must-haves. Show, don't tell. Get people into the facility and see it. You've put this measure on the ballot because you don't think your existing jail works. Go show people. They don't know. And no matter where people fall on the political spectrum, they're guilty of believing what they've seen before and not what the current conditions are. I mean, I work for a living for a firm that relies on publicly funded projects to happen. And, about 5 years ago, I grew up in Pennsylvania. My mother called me and said that there was a bond, they were voting to replace the middle school I went to. And I said, that's crazy. That was fine when I was there. And she said, it was 20 years ago. And, I hadn't thought about that. And things change in 20 years. Let your voters see what that jail looks like right now. Make sure your numbers are right. Go over them again, go over them again. The absolute worst thing that can happen is if you put the wrong numbers on any of the information that goes out to your voters. You're elected to administer the policies of the electorate, not to raise taxes. What I mean by that, or rather what the county commissioner at a county in the lower Willamette Valley said is, this was somebody who came from a pretty conservative Republican county, and he said, I'm a Republican, I don't like raising taxes, but, that's not what I'm doing here. I'm putting a measure on the ballot, and I'm putting all the information out there. I'm letting the voters decide for themselves whether it's right or not. And I think that made sense. What that commissioner was trying to say was that, he wasn't the one voting to raise taxes. It was ultimately, if voters feel like the plan is right, they will go ahead and do that. Fact check. So you can't go to your newspaper and tell them how to cover this. They're gonna have plenty of ideas of how they can cover this, but you can go to them and you can ask them not to say things that are blatantly false. So, if there's a letter, if they're getting letters of the editor saying, well, this $40 million jail bond is outrageous, don't run it because it's not a $40 million jail bond. Now, if they want to write in and say that Scott and Kathleen and Leanne and Lisa and Sarah are crazy, that's fair game. The newspaper really shouldn't be stopping people from doing that. You may disagree, but if there's numbers there, if people are trying to make state facts and they're blatantly wrong, call the newspaper and call them on it, or anywhere else that stuff is running. And again, show the voters of consequences of failure, but don't scare them. I talked about the importance of what that no vote means, but you don't want to have people thinking that if this jail bond measure doesn't pass, Clatsop County is just going to be overrun by mass terror. You don't want to freak your voters out. Just give them the facts. Let them know what happens if they vote no. So some of the legal deadlines, this is May, that's not relevant to you. Here's November. So August 17th is the last day to file that ballot title for publication of notice. September 6th is the last day to file the Form SEL 801 with the county. September 10th, your voters pamphlet work needs to be done. October 17th is the first day that ballots go out. So election day is November 6th, but you've got a good solid 2 weeks, more than that, where your voters already have their ballots, and a lot of them are only going to have their minds made up. So your campaign can't be happening, October 18th, October 19th, October 20th. Your campaign has to be happening, late August, September, early October, and then you're done. And that's what the calendar looks like. So, where do you want to be? I talked earlier about how important it is to get out in your community. You cannot expect people to come here or, over to your other building or any of your buildings to seek out info. You've got to go to your voters and go tell them the story. So, get on every city council agenda, every incorporated community in Clatsop County, get on the agenda. It's not a matter of getting them to support it, but tell them why you did this. Ask for 5 minutes and just tell them this is why we decided to put a jail bond measure on the ballot. Same for those school boards, the school districts that have, decided to run bond measures. Go tell them why you're running one too. Your faith-based communities, it's really important to reach out to them. Let them know why this is on there. Let them know why it matters to them. You want to reach out to Rotary, Elks, Kiwanis, Lions, all of those service organizations. All of those people are voters, and all of them love to talk. So let them, you're not going to be able to stop them from sharing information, but ideally you can get them to share the right information. You can't get them to agree with you, but ideally when they're going and saying, you know, so-and-so on the commission is a knucklehead for supporting this, their reason for it is an actual factual one and not something that's made up. Go to your chambers of commerce, go to the county Democrats and county Republicans, tell them why this is happening. You know, it may be two different stories, but let them know. I mentioned the school boards. So here is a much more detailed list of where you want to get out to. It's a lot of work, you know, and ideally how this happens is, you know, somebody from the county goes and gives a very factual, you know, story of what this is, and then the sheriff or somebody else who can, you know, an elected official or somebody from the public who can be a little more passionate and can tell people to vote yes, goes up and gives a similar story, and they should be getting to every single one of these outlets. That's a lot of work to do.
Wait, you've got Nehalem Bay Fire and Rescue? Why do you have that on there?
If I'm not mistaken, a little bit of that falls within the county? No?
No.
Okay.
Cannon Beach Rural Fire Protection District.
Okay.
Covers the south end of Cove Beach. Oh, Suzanne, are you correcting me? Tell me what. Oh, on Highway 53 over by Ginger and Brigham. Okay, I'm wrong, they're right. I'm just thinking about my neighborhood, right? It's long. Well, got it, thank you. I'd never seen that before, something different.
So something you probably have seen before, this was a graphic that ran in the Historian a little while ago. And if anybody from the Historian is in the room, yes, I did pay the fee for the one-time commercial rights usage. This is, you know, a geographic divide. So when there was, you know, the regional, the airport, or sorry, the Lifelight bond measure, there was an article that talked about how hard it was to get out to all of Clatsop County and tell that story. You should be looking at this constantly between now and mid-October in terms of thinking about, have I gotten out to everybody? You've got some really small hamlets that have a couple dozen voters. They have just as much a right to hear about what's on this bond as somebody who is down the street. They are just as important as the people of Astoria. So get out and tell them the story. I cannot stress that enough. You have no hope of passing a bond if you don't reach out to those smaller communities that have a hard time getting information. And that's the story. So what questions are left that we haven't talked about?
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, no kidding.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
I think we have it.
Yes, it is saved over there on
Great
that.
primer.
Yes.
So let's talk about what a PAC would look like a little bit. So, you know, in times before, and maybe the sheriff can elaborate on this a bit, we're talking about PACs. We're talking about the Political Action Committee. And I know you put one together for the last bond measure, and it seems, could you speak to the value of PACs and where the commissioners fit into that, and how who should be carrying the banner for would that be the sheriff pretty much?
Well, what we did last time, Chair, we put together a PAC, and obviously I put those together for my own elections and so on. We had a different atmosphere at that time. This was 17 years ago when we really went after this last big one where we put the big PAC together. And it was successful in some precincts and not successful in others. We did reach out to everybody and anybody we could. We utilized people, as I spoke earlier, that were happy about it, but we also put people on that PAC that at first were like, no, we don't want this at all. So when we started educating people as to how, you know, this would go and how it would, you know, what the real true needs were, not so much the wants, but the needs, as he spoke to earlier, it was pretty successful. But I don't think, and obviously I wasn't sheriff at the time, but I don't think that we had quite the drive that we did then. Plus the jail was almost, you know, 20 years newer than it is today. And at that time we had a huge amount of people in the community saying, you know, our jail's only 30 years old. This is ridiculous. Why are we doing that? And it's similar to what he said about his school. So with that all said, we've learned a lot of lessons. Also the same thing, lessons that we learned about watching the college try 4 times to try to pass a college, the grandiose scheme and everything. I love college. I had a good time there, but it's about what your community can afford and what you're willing to do as far as, you know, my staff going out and reaching people. So we will build the pack, but what my main concern is, and I've said this publicly and I've said it to, I think, all of y'all, is that I want total buy-in. And next week we have, we've pared down our staffing again. We have another meeting next week. We have really scrutinized this. We have got it down to where we're going to be moving individuals into here, into there. So this is not going to affect the general fund in any way, shape, or form that originally it was going to. The impact will be far less burdensome to the general fund, which it has to be. But my main concern is, and I probably shouldn't put y'all on the spot, but we had 3 commissioners here when they decided to put it onto the ballot. But my main concern is I want buy-in from every individual county commissioner, and I want basically a verbal yes. Sheriff, we want you to move forward. We do support this. And the reason being I'm asking that is because this is a lot of work. And I don't want to stress out my staff when I have 2 commissioners or maybe 3 commissioners or whatever, 1 commissioner saying out there, you know, yeah, I voted for it, but I'm not going to support it in any way, shape, or form. And what that does is it undermines every bit of work that we're currently doing. And we've put, I bet, well over 150, 200 hours into this already up to this point. And I'm willing to dedicate my time. I've already made many, I guess, contacts with city councils. I'm going to be doing all that, the fire departments, all the notes that he had up there. We've already got lists laid out where we're going to be starting attacking. And I believe in the 10, 11-week rule as well. You don't want to start saturating people right now. It's usually 2 to 3 months prior to, and it's light, and it comes on a little bit stronger, and you start getting all your ducks in a row. So the pack, myself and my staff will be putting together. Obviously, we'll reach out to the citizens. This sounds somewhat archaic, but you want females on this because a lot of times it's just the white male that wants to jail, but that's not true. There's a lot of moms out there that have sons or children that have gone awry, and they said if they only could have been held a little bit longer where they could get the treatment and do all that, and then explain what a jail actually does, not just that the jail is a place to incarcerate people. It's about mental health, it's about treatment, it's about all these other things. So putting the pack together will be it's a lot of work, but like I said, I want buy-in from all 5 of y'all, and that's what it's basically going to boil down to.
Great.
So.
I have a question, though, Sheriff. Since you're a county employee, what are the restrictions on county employees? I'm
an elected official, so therefore I can go out and speak. If my people are working during the day, like say a deputy, they can't go out and promote this while they're on duty. As a citizen, they can go out and speak and talk all they want, off duty and so on, but while they're on duty, no ifs, ands, or buts. Me, as an elected official, I can talk all day long while I'm on duty, off duty, same with all y'all. You're elected officials, and you can go to the public and speak at any time, anywhere. I've spoke at Rotary. I mean, I've been in Rotary for 15 years. Well, I was for 15 years. I've spoke to the Kiwanis. I mean, this has been something I've been doing for 14 years as sheriff, and 2 years prior as chief deputy. So I went out and spoke a lot, you know, as a sheriff. So it's something that comes natural.
So with the presentation that Justin, that you gave, there is a lot of information on there. How far are we from, I'm all for getting all the information out to the voters.
Absolutely.
I have no problem with that at all. So where are we at with getting the information digitalized, getting all these different points that are suggested?
Well,
where are we and who will be doing that?
2 weeks from today, we will have the ability to come back to everybody and say, look, we just sat down. Next week we have a meeting, a large meeting with staff, with county manager's office, personnel, Monica, the chief deputy, the jail commander, and so on, where we're going to actually be able to say, you know what, we're definitely moving forward because we have enough, we have scrutinized this so much and we've got it down to where it's not going to affect the general fund. Once we've made that decision, which I'm 99% sure we will make and go ahead to move forward with this, then we will start the process of getting it not just on the county's website, but on my Facebook page, well, not mine, the sheriff's office Facebook page, the county's Facebook page. We will be utilizing Tom Bennett, we'll be using the county manager's office, and that's where we start pulling people together and putting this pack together, and then being able to push all the information, and he nailed it on the head with this presentation, just as we've done before. You give everybody so much information that there's no way in heck that they can't say, oh, I didn't know that, because we might think it's, oh, that's not necessary, but every single time you say something like that, you're making a mistake, because there's one person out there that's going to be able to look at that and say, well, where's this piece of information? So it will all be put on, and I imagine probably within, I'm hoping by July, by the beginning of the year, the new year, budget year and so on. So it's just a work in progress. So I would imagine within the next month or so.
Now, at the budget meeting, you were talking about sharpening your pencils to work on the operational costs and the medical costs, which is part of the operational costs.
Correct.
Those are the questions that I have had. So how close are you to finding an answer for that so that you'll be able to share that with the public?
That's the big meeting next week that my chief deputy and Monica and the jail commander will be, and I believe the county manager will be attending. I'm out of the area for next week, but I've got some far better, smarter people going to that meeting than I. So within that week or so, we will have, I know Paul's been crunching numbers and crunching people, not literally, but putting people and moving rovers into positions instead of this or that, and how can we do this relief versus that relief, and how many people can we actually do running this place. And originally it was 12 some people over than what we had. The general fund, we can't sustain that. We cannot manage that kind of staffing. Clatsop County just can't do it. And like we said earlier, we're not going to open up a jail like Columbia County did and Multnomah County did years and years ago, where they build this grandiose, beautiful facility, and then they never open it. And it's just ludicrous. And I'm not going to put Clatsop County through that. I've been here most of my life, and I'm not going to, I'm still paying taxes just like everybody else. But I, obviously, from being on the inside for so many years, understand the importance of why we need a jail and a facility that's conducive for the amount of people that are actually in this community. And then having one of the highest crimes per capita in the state of Oregon, we're just releasing 4, 5, 6 people a day. I made a phone call today, hold that guy till he gets to prison next week, because we had to release him twice, and he might not show up next week when he's supposed to go. And this guy's a dangerous person. So anyway, I'm sorry.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So I really appreciate hearing this. Very useful, very helpful. What I'm hearing is people are concerned about their cumulative tax bill. So
Right.
if you're preparing data and you can help people see what will my tax bill be if this jail levy passes, if this school levy passes, because people need help
Right.
figuring that out. That's one thing. The other thing is I feel more and more, I want to, not angst exactly, but concern that if we don't do something about our jail, what we're going to have is some kinds of not just increased crime in the community, but unfortunate incidents within the jail. Am I realistic?
No,
in that
you're
concern?
spot on, and this is a terrible analogy, but it's very true. When you have too many rats in a cage, you're going to have big problems. And the same thing holds true for a jail. My inmates are in danger, but and so are my corrections workers, the deputies themselves. And so at one time, this jail was all the way up to 90 individuals, and it was way over, it was just bursting at the seams. So when I became sheriff, we went back before the Board of County Commissioners, and we had it taken down to 60. And remember, this jail was built for 29. So that ought to tell you right there that we're really stuffed at the limits. And that doesn't mean that 60 people might be in there. That means on any given day, I might have 3 or 4 individuals that need to be housed separately for medical reasons, or maybe they want to kill the other person that's in cell, whatever. And the way the jail's built now, it's just not conducive to separate people out. So
third question, 'cause I appreciate hearing all that, which Talking about killing people in the cell, I'm sorry, I got distracted. I
Oh,
can't
sorry.
remember. Well, I just, but those kinds of dangers are, Measure 8, folks. The mandatory incarceration.
Measure 11?
Sorry, Measure 11.
That's okay.
Thank you.
No, that's okay.
Too many budget hearings.
No, I know.
Well, okay, so the Measure 11 folk, are we going to see any reduction in that population, which will free up some?
Measure 11 individuals are sent to state prison. And anything, the old Johnny Paycheck song, anything under a year, 11 months and 29 days, they do county time. Anything over that year, if you're sentenced, then you go to the state prisons. So the reduction already with the Possession of Controlled Substances Act and so on that just passed last year, you cannot go to prison for possession of controlled substance. So what that did was it put more of a bind on county jails. And when they said, oh, you're not going to go to prison, but what it did was actually start flooding our county jails with more individuals being sentenced to 30 days or 90 days or whatever.
Okay.
So.
Well, that was my concern, because I remember you're telling us that we have people we have to take care of, so we don't have basically discretionary cells.
Right. Well, that's more for mentally ill or people with diseases and things like that that have to be separated out, sex offenders, because they're going to get beat up, or burglars might, whatever. So
if
there's
you can
classifications.
if you can just help us make sense of all these dimensions of the problem, that with data, that I think is what we're asking for.
You bet. As a matter of fact, directed the parole and probation lieutenant yesterday or the day before to start telling me she came in and she said, we just released 5 or 6 individuals in the last week. One person, went out and reoffended, rape, who was a sex offender. And it's just constant. And like I told you yesterday, the bottom of the day, at the end of the day, I said this yesterday, I can delegate the authority, but I can never delegate the responsibility. So when that person leaves that jail, and I'm the one that finally signs his papers and says, we've got to kick him out, I'm ultimately responsible, and I don't mind that. I'll carry that burden on my shoulders. But when we have a jail that's conducive for the needs of the community, then you have a much safer place for your children to go to jail, for your children to go to school, and hopefully not jail, but for your children to go to school and meet those needs. And then it's also important, I don't remember who was talking about the lunch buddies, it might have been Sarah Nebeker, but Commissioner Nebeker, but those kind of programs are so important. I believe in that program immensely. And I'm like, give them the money. But I also understood that it meant that, we should do it in the correct approach as well. But when you have programs like that, you don't have individuals as often going to jail, I firmly believe, if you look at the totality of the whole situation of your community. Mm-hmm. And so with those kind of things, and then same thing occurs when you have individuals that are in jail that have the ability to start learning or retraining their mind when we mentor them in jail. It's kind of the same thing as we're mentoring kids in the 3rd grade at reading, or 4th grade or whatever. So I'm sorry, Chair.
No, it's very informing. We're going to try to wrap this up, but this is a really good and important conversation, so if it goes a little over 6 o'clock, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Commissioner?
Thank you. I feel more positive now that we have a professional who is helping to pull this together, and when all of this information is coalesced, I will be very excited to see it and be able to speak to my constituents. My family in Sacramento runs a political consultancy business, and they do statewide measures, they do governor's campaigns, they do all sorts. And I think what you gave here was really good.
Thank you.
Would it be helpful?
He did drop his comb though back here. So, no, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
Would it be helpful if the commissioners in their individual districts came with you or whoever from your staff to speak to the councils, to the organizations in those areas?
I would love it, and I've actually, when I lay out my agenda, so to speak, I would be, and I've already planned on contacting y'all and hoping you would come along with me, whomever it might be. So, and I truly do appreciate the fact that, when I ran for sheriff last time, I was supporting the jail and that we needed a new jail, but it never really got its feet off the ground. It was a disastrous attempt, and I think that might have been the one you were referring to, and I was going back 17 years. But it wasn't planned, it wasn't methodical enough, and we didn't put the time in. We knew that we needed it, but I still was willing to stand up and say, this is something that the community really needs, based on my experience and the other individuals that just said, no, we don't need it. They didn't really have a reason for that, but it was just something they thought they could, stick the flagpole in, and unfortunately, it didn't work for them. But here we are now today in current times. We know we need a facility, and we're approaching this as methodically and conscientiously as we can, and making sure that this is something that our community can afford, not just willy-nilly bouncing down the hall and saying, yeah, we need a jail, just give us one. It doesn't work that way. So anyway, I'm sorry to take the mic from you.
No worries.
Justin, I have one question. Since you do this kind of stuff, and this has been a perception that I have, and some people that I've worked with, that we need the higher the voter turnout for this, the better, right? Is that generally a good sense? Because that's the way I've kind of gone, getting the more voters, and so we want to put it on the general, and rather than a primary.
I have heard that. I don't know if I agree with it. I guess I would say that you want the highest educated turnout possible. There are, and with this running in November, in what is going to be a pretty, people are pretty passionate about, this midterm election that's coming up. There are going to be a lot of people who are voting who are not filling out their ballot specifically because there's a jail bond on the ballot. You're going to be the least important thing to a lot of people as they're filling out their ballots. So that just reemphasizes why it's so important for you to get all the information out there, because they're going to be just bombarded with information, on a national scale come September and October. So you do have your work cut out for you, and it's so important that you can kind of cut through that, and why it's important for you to actually physically get out to all those communities. And Commissioner Nebaker, just to go back to what you said, I think it is a great idea for the county commissioners to be there with the sheriff talking about this. This shouldn't be the sheriff's jail bond measure. This is yours, and just get out to your community and tell that story.
Great. Is there any final comments or questions for the presenters? This has been very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner.